Welcome back to the Attaching to God podcast, hosted by Geoff and Cyd Holsclaw. This is a podcast exploring a neuroscience-informed spiritual formation and produced by Embodied Faith. We're really glad to have a friend, Steve Cuss, on today. He is the author of several books, Managing Leadership Anxiety, also the more recent, The Expectation Gap, which investigates that tiny, vast space between our beliefs and our experience of God. He's also a columnist and a host for Christianity Today's Being Human podcast. And Steve founded The Capable Life, which is helping to move people outside of anxiety to break patterns and increase well-being. Steve, thank you so much for being on the podcast with us today.
Oh, it's great to be with you guys. I love the work you're doing, so I've been looking forward to this chat.
Oh, well, we're so glad. I know it took a while to get this on the calendar, partly because you're entering into a new life stage, a new work, which we're going to get to in a second. But as of the recording of this podcast, we are desperately waiting for the return of Formula One racing.
Yeah, we're down to
F1
days.
racing. Now, we are human beings, we're not just podcast hosts or authors, and part of that being human is to be interested in sports. Now,
really? You're going to say that part of being human is to be interested in sports. Okay, all of you listeners who are not interested in sports, I promise you're still human.
Well, I think you could create a Venn diagram of human and sports. And
I meant us. So I got into F1 just a couple years ago. It's because Cyd got me into it. And it's because our son got her into it about 4 or 5 years. But you've been a fan for a long time. Could you just give us the quick backstory?
Yeah, my dad, before I was born, so this is before I knew my parents, before I was born, my parents lived in Surrey, England. They worked for what's functionally now the McLaren team. Back then it was Jack Brabham. My dad was a mechanic, the guy that really made McLaren what it is today. A lot of Americans wouldn't know him, but around the world he's known. Ron Dennis. He was my dad's boss. I'll get these numbers wrong. Dad would have been 27 or 28, mechanical engineer. My dad's kind of a genius machine guy. Ron, I think, was 17, maybe 18. Just graduated high school, now running a Formula One team as a teenager. And even back then, Dad's like, he was a genius. Like, he was this incredible guy. So I grew up at the racetrack. I raced competitive go-karts as a teen, like the Formula One guys do. The difference being they're fast. I never was. I never did it with any aspiration other than just enjoying. I mean, it's amazing. You go 70 miles an hour and you're a kid. It's incredible.
That is really fast.
I've probably been a big fan since 1981. I think I was 10. I was old enough then. Niki Lauda was coming out of retirement. That was big news. I struggled to follow it. When I moved to America, it was hard to find it in America for a while. Mm-hmm. And then as my boys
Netflix put out their series, and now we're all fans.
Yeah, that's right. Netflix really has helped it. And then my boys, when they were teens in the early 2000s, I got them into it. And yeah, we're all in.
Wow. So what are you looking forward to in this next season?
I mean, just briefly, like Oscar Piastri, the new Aussie, this will be his third season. I think he has a genuine chance at the World Championship. So I'm excited to see how he does. But what most excites me, honestly, Cyd, is this is the first year where I think 6 or 7 people could be world champion.
I know, it's crazy, isn't it?
I can't think of in my lifetime when it's been that way. And when I was growing up, Formula One was about minutes and seconds, and now it's about tenths and hundredths. It's just gotten insane. So like if the sun goes behind the clouds and the barometric pressure changes on the track, that might lose you 2 tenths and the other guy gains 2 tenths.
Just a little bit, and they're not as grippy.
Yeah. So it's a great sport for obsessive people, which I think I'm one of those.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. Well, we can shift gears, although we could probably fill a whole episode. Maybe we'll just have to have maybe we just need to put it on the calendar. We'll have an annual episode between Being Human and the Attaching to God podcast where we just talk about F1 for one episode. And we'll just drop it in like February or something like that.
And you can draw your venom of the overlap of humanity and sports fanness. Yeah.
Yeah, sports fandom is a subset of all humanity.
There we go. Well, and the reason why we like F1 is because it's both like a team sport and an individual sport. So if you're like a real individual sport person, like tennis or golf, like you can kind of get that. But if you're a team sport person, you like all the things work. It's like both insane. Okay. Anyways,
we got to keep going though, Geoff. Like your teammate is also your biggest competitor.
Yes,
you have to work with him and defeat him. The paradox and double binds in it are just fantastic.
And the way God created us to be constructors and creatively build things in the world is exactly what F1 has to do. They build their whole cars from scratch. Okay. Well, we will move on though. But so you've kind of made a couple different shifts in your life and ministry. You were a pastor, a local church pastor for many, many years. But then you've written a couple books and you kind of shifted your work mainly toward this thing called Capable Life. Could you tell us what that is? And then I want to get into this new thing that you just started, your program in clinical psychology.
Yeah, what I do in a nutshell is I study the dynamics that mess up relationships. And there's only a few. There's actually a recurring core few dynamics that infect every relationship. So I do that. And then I help people become more aware of their relationships, which I know that sounds funny, but maybe the most inconspicuous relationship we have is the relationship with ourselves. And yet it is the relationship that dictates health in every other relationship. So when people get anxious, they always focus on another person. They either blame another person, get frustrated, why does he do it that way? Or they worry about that other person. They try to worry the other person to change. So a lot of what I do is help you get back on yourself, notice what's going on in you. And then more recently, it was kind of a light bulb for me when I realized, oh, wow, the same dynamics that infect our human relationships also infect our relationship with God, which I know is a lot of your territory with attaching to God. So that really lit me up. So Capable Life, we teach you the core dynamics that infect relationships so that you can manage them and be well in all your relationships. And we're really targeting Christian leaders in difficult situations so that they can walk into those difficult situations and not catch all the anxiety and not spread their own, but be well.
Oh, that's so important. So important. Yeah.
I feel like you and Cyd now could just talk for 5 hours. Cyd works with a lot of ministry leaders, especially ones who have come out of really, maybe traumatizing, maybe abusive, but just certainly difficult situations, and kind of walks them kind of through that.
Yeah, and sort of walking that delicate balance of like, what you experienced is not okay.
Yeah.
And you need to recognize that there are some things within you that were contributing to the not okayness of the situation, right? It's not all outside of you. And that's the part that's so hard to face, is that there is brokenness within me that interacts with the brokenness in the world around me, that exacerbates that brokenness and makes it bigger than it needs to be. But I do have a part to play. And that gentle awareness of, Jesus meets you right where you are. Can you meet yourself right where you are?
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a fascinating question. Like anxiety, a lot of what I study is the gospel of anxiety. Anxiety is always sending us a message, and it tends to say, look, it's all on you. There's nothing you can do. Just keep worrying. And so I do find, I love what you just said, Cyd, because I do find some people love the idea that they can take responsibility because now they have agency. And so, for example, just to be direct, when I've worked with people in domestic violence, you think about a domestic violence dynamic, the person who's the so-called victim of it can often feel like, oh, I'm stuck. Well, I have no agency. But when you can help them gently see what they're doing, they're like, wait, I do have agency. I can do things. So I do find it, to be really helpful for people who want to be well. When Jesus said, do you want to be well? I do find the kind of work the three of us do, we're hunting for people who want to be well.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it's heartbreaking that it requires participation in the wanting to be well. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So just not to go over all of your other work, but what are like one or two of those core kind of dynamics and that anxiety that you see in people that kind of sabotages over and over?
Yeah. So the two simple dynamics would be that reactivity, which is my specialty. The problem with reactivity is it's always based on a false need that's not being met. So the first dynamic is understanding your false needs. One of my false needs is people pleasing. Another one for me is looking smart. I need you to think I'm a smart person. If you don't think I'm smart, I get reactive. So when a telemarketer calls me and says, our files indicate that your car is out of warranty, I know they don't have a file on my car. They're just cold calling. One of the reasons I know they don't have a file on my car is I have a 2004 Saab. Like, what? It's a 21-year-old car. What do you?
There's no warranty.
There's no warranty. Saab is gone. Like but it's not enough for me to say good luck with your next call. I get really combative with them. I'm not proud of this, but I'll be like, oh, tell me which car you're calling about. I'm trying to prove to them that I'm not stupid. You can't trick me. So this weird thing rises up in me because of my false need to look smart. When that happens in our body just injects us with a little bit of adrenaline. So we're all familiar with acute anxiety, which is when your body's in danger, swerving to avoid a car accident,
Right.
jogging and coming across a snake, losing your child in a playground. These would all be acute anxiety. You get full of adrenaline. Your brain gets really focused. My field is false needs. And the problem is humans have 30 to 50 false needs. And so we're constantly getting little doses of adrenaline. This is why leaders burn out. So that's one side of what I do, is help leaders identify their false needs so they can be well. And then related to that, reactivity is the only kind of anxiety that's contagious. So trauma is not contagious, grief is not contagious, but reactivity is. And so helping leaders notice the spread. I walk into the room, I'm kind of spun up. Maybe you say something to me that triggers me. You've now shut down. You've gotten real quiet. I'm overcompensating by trying to make you speak. I teach people to notice the contagion. Then the further dynamic is reactivity forms predictable patterns over time. We all fall into the same pattern. So most of my work is with teams. Well, over time, it's become predictable. It only takes me 2 or 3 minutes to find it. I walk into a team. Okay, Bob always uses the most words in every meeting. Okay, John has to have the last word. Oh, Sally never speaks up unless she's called upon. These are predictable patterns. And so whether it's just a regular team or whether it's coming in, sometimes I'll come in after some kind of moral failure situation where the stakes are much higher. It's still a predictable pattern. The person who had the moral failure is the most anxious in the room. But because they're generating the anxiety and they're not carrying it, or another way, they're not taking responsibility, everyone around them is carrying their anxiety. Therefore, they will continue their bad behavior. So usually when I come in to talk about moral failure, the team thinks I'm going to be focusing on the person who got caught, but I'm always interested in all the dynamics around that person that kept them propped up. So those would just be a few handfuls of kinds of work that we do. And listen, it gets as simple as noticing what happens when you're trying to get your kids out for school in the morning. The anxiety flying around there, like it can be really simple as well. It doesn't have to be complicated.
Yeah.
I love that. And it really kind of meshes with our kind of focus on attachment. There's this weird kind of historical, I think, mistake that the romantic kind of research on attachment separated the pretty normal insecure attachment styles into anxious attachment and then avoidant attachment.
Yeah.
Which was unfortunate because all the research says they're all anxious. They're just managing their anxiety different. And
That's
so you
right.
really have anxious who maybe you can read their anxiety through their actions and interactions a little easier. And then you have the anxiously avoidant who are
Yes.
actively trying to avoid your anxiety, their own anxiety. They're trying to, take control or follow the rules or get in their heads, right? But yeah, we're all managing anxiety, and in our kind of side of some of this work, the insecure attachment is just different strategies by which we try to work out that anxiety and avoid it and overcome it.
Well, and
Yeah, that's
no, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Geoff, because like in systems theory, we teach this thing called differentiation of self. And the two opposites of it are enmeshment and detachment. And I find that a more helpful phrase, because the avoidant style sounds cool, but when someone's avoidant attached, they're still dragging your anxiety with them. They're just creating distance to manage it. But so I find differentiation helpful there, because either way is an anxious response. And your average type A entrepreneurial strong leader usually is the last person in the room to know he or she is anxious, because they've been told their whole life that it's strength and gifting. So that's some of my tougher work, is helping that person see that their behavior is often an anxious response.
So if I'm hearing you right, then it sounds like you're saying every single human has some anxiety.
Yeah, the founder of the theory I trained in,
And
Murray Bowen.
sports and anxiety. We're working on our Venn diagram here.
Yeah,
Sorry,
that's
sorry.
right. Yeah, Murray Bowen says to be human is to be anxious.
Yeah.
When I wrote my first book, the publisher asked me to change the cover and guarantee that we would eliminate anxiety by the end of the book. And I just laughed. I said, no, the best you can hope for is to manage it some of the time. I think the good news, Cyd, in our experience, if you can manage anxiety like 20% of the time, it feels like 80% of the time. Like you can actually live your life pretty anxious most of the time. Just a little bit where you're managing it can really feel like transformation. I find that to be really encouraging. So I covered this in my second book, but I'm currently encouraging churches to go away from that 100% all in for Jesus, sold out language. I find that incredibly unhelpful. I say, let's see if we can start by following Jesus 15% of the time.
Yeah.
Let's start there. That's a difficult goal, because if we keep using this 100% language, we're all going to keep pretending we are. And I just don't find that helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I think that's a much more human way of communicating
Yeah.
it. And I love how you talk about being human sized too, that we get to be human sized. And can you just talk a little bit about maybe how you are defining anxiety, or how family system, whoever you're basing your work on,
Yeah.
how would you actually define anxiety? Since
Yeah.
we all have it.
Mm-hmm. It's a really important question. And I would first say that as a culture, we need to learn to use the plural. Because if we would just say, there are many anxieties, now we can use curiosity. Well, I wonder what kind of anxiety you are dealing with. So I deal with one kind of anxiety. There's like 8 or 10 different anxieties, but the one I deal with, chronic anxiety or reactivity, I would define it as a false need that feels real in the moment. So I can tell you now soberly that I don't need your approval. But after this podcast is over, if you were to look at me and say, that was kind of boring, Steve, my body would tell me I'm in trouble, even though I'm actually not in trouble at all. But my body is acting like I'm in danger. My wife, Lisa, who is an attachment therapist, she'd love to chat with you guys sometime. She has a real simple way. She says, we have head beliefs and body beliefs, and our body wins every time.
Yeah.
No, it's not even a close fight. And so that's my field, is helping you learn to notice when you're having a physiological reaction, a microdose, believing that you're in trouble or danger, or that you are in deficit. Sometimes reactivity says you need more when you don't. We've all met with somebody that needs constant reassurance, constant encouragement, and you give them that compliment and you see it just go into a black hole of abyss in their life. And your compliments can't keep up with their internal condemnation. So that's how I would define anxiety. It's a false need that feels real in the moment. I want to be so careful for listeners, because there are other anxieties that would be defined as a chemical imbalance that need a good medication.
Yeah.
Trauma would be defined as a real event that happened to your body. But in my field, reactivity, a false need that feels real.
Okay. And so I'm glad you just brought that up, because it sounds like maybe you're separating that false need that feels real is a very common anxiety, regardless of whether you've ever experienced trauma or not.
That's right. Every human has false needs, because when we were kids, no matter how wonderful our family was, we were at a deficit. We didn't get what we
Mhm.
needed. And we began to, and I know this, I'm talking to people who do this work, but we then began to develop coping mechanisms so we could survive life.
Yeah.
And I would just say that what we've done is drag those childhood agreements into our adulthood.
Yeah.
And the thing that served us well as kids is now strangling us as adults.
Mhm.
Now, trauma, I'm not trained in trauma. My wife's a trauma therapist, but I deal with so many people in trauma. I usually deal as a companion, not as an expert. It gets so challenging, Sid, because trauma is telling you the truth and deceiving you at the same time.
Right.
Chronic anxiety is always deceiving you. My chronic anxiety is always telling me I must make you happy. If you're hurting, I must say the right thing. None of that's all wildly unreliable. Trauma, boy, it's tricky. Like you deal with people with church abuse. That really happened. That's
Mhm.
true. So it's true, but also the meaning you make from it in the future is unreliable. So I find trauma to take a long time and require lots of gentleness and patience.
Yeah. Yeah. Likewise. Yeah. I'm curious when you're talking about the false needs in in the moment and the way that that shows up as reactivity, would that line up with, so Geoff and I often talk about, you're nervous, and I mean, this is part of the science too, but that your nervous
Yeah,
system has two
yeah,
priorities, either protect yourself or
yeah,
connect with other people.
yeah.
Am I reading you right in saying that when we're in reactivity, we're in that protection mode? Like
That's
we're not
exactly right.
interested in connecting, we're interested in protecting ourselves.
That's exactly right. The first thing reactivity does is it disconnects you. That's the
Yeah.
first thing, and it puts you in a false reality. You're disconnected from yourself, from you. I can't hear you anymore because I'm busy trying to please you. These kinds of things. I'm not aware. I mean, God. It's not disconnected me from God. It's not like our sovereign, all-powerful God is saying, "Oh, I guess I can't be around anymore." But it is disconnecting me from awareness of God. So I'm no
Mhm.
longer relaxed into God's presence. I'm now operating on my own strength. And what we teach is there's two forms of protection. There's the getting smaller, which is kind of like you're a turtle in your shell. The most common example of that is somebody who no longer feels safe to speak up in a meeting. And then there's the getting bigger. We call that pretense. So we call it protection and pretense. They're really both protection. But that
Mhm.
second one is much more aggressive. It's more armoring up. I have to make myself bigger than human to manage the situation, but both of them are a form of threat.
Mhm.
And it's so crazy because I'm not under threat at all. So acute anxiety, seeing a tiger snake, that's true. Trauma is true and false, and chronic anxiety is always false. It's so nuanced. I'm
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
glad we have these kinds of conversations because it's going to take a lot of this for people to flesh it all out.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit?
Well,
I'm sorry, Geoff. I know you want to go into it something else. I know you do. I
oh
just
no,
want
that's all
one
right.
more quick question. Can you say more about that word pretense that you chose
Yeah.
for that sort of getting bigger behavior?
Yeah, that would have been my main coping mechanism. So I grew up really insecure and afraid. Home was not a safe place. School was not a safe place. I was easily bullied. And in fact, that turned out to be true as a pastor too. I tended to attract bullies as a pastor. That surprised me. Well, once I got to become a teenager, I just compensated with wild overconfidence and arrogance.
Hmm.
Mm.
And I was always presenting an image of myself to you. And it usually involved charm, brilliance, dominating the conversation, making you laugh. But I didn't realize for years that that was an anxious response. I just thought, wow, look at me. Thank God I'm here. Like now the party can start. I never quite said it that way,
Mhm.
but I definitely acted that way. Um, and that's pretense. That's me curating an image I want to control what you see in me.
Right, right.
Now, when I was a trauma chaplain, what happened is my peers saw right through my pretense. First people in my life, not
Mm.
they weren't the first to see through it. They were the first to reach through it and grab my blind spots and show them to me.
Mm.
And
Mm.
they were so threatening to me because I'd never had somebody aggressively show me who I was that
Yeah.
I didn't know existed. And so that was for me, my journey of salvation in some ways was my trauma chaplaincy because there's nothing like walking into rooms of death on a frequent basis to drop your pretense. And pretense is not helpful in death.
Yeah.
And then in my chaplain peer group, as we are debriefing together, we debrief for 90 minutes every day together. And they would point things out at me I didn't even know were there. And noticing my threatened response, and my response came out combative. Who are you? Mind your own business. You guys are all liberal. Like all of these different things where I'm trying to push people away. And they're just trying to help me become an integrated human. So I know I said a lot there, but that would be an example. I happen to be well acquainted with pretense, I'm sorry to say.
Yeah. I just think, I mean, it's a great
Thank
word
you.
choice. I just really like that word because it is like, it's a projection, a false projection of what really is protective behavior. And but it
Yeah.
exudes self-confidence,
Yes.
but it's not that.
Some of our most famous moral scandals in the church are the most anxious, terrified people who have coped for 30 years with pretense.
Yeah.
And to me, the tragedy is that their board was no help to them at all. Their board did not catch them early and say, hey, we know where this train stops,
Yeah.
and we can help you. And that's part of the work I want to explore in what Geoff's wanting to talk about.
Yeah. So go ahead, Geoff.
What a
Open it
great
up.
segue. Well, I think all of us are very committed to the hope, but also building like resilient church cultures,
Yep.
building healthy, mature church cultures so that we can see through things like that, but in a healthy way, right? Not in a mean or condescending way, but so that church boards or just the people in the church can help more rather,
Yeah.
right? So I know that all of us in different ways, we're really Sid and I are very much like talking about attachment. You're talking like family systems and managing anxiety, and so that question of change and creating healthy environments. It seems like that's kind of led you down this road. You're actually starting a doctoral program in, I think, clinical psychology. Is that right?
Yeah, the doctorate, you know what's funny is I don't know technically what the doctorate is in. It's either leadership psychology, clinical psychology, or systems theory. I'm only a month into it. What I do know
What
is
letters are going to be after your name? Is it
it's so fun. I
PhD
don't
or is it
actually
the
care what the doctorate is in, but
PYS?
it's what I'm chasing that
Okay.
I'm clear on. Yeah, the
All right, good.
topic
Well,
and the
so
goal.
then what is that? Because this is partly why I was like, we gotta just like talk for a bit, because like the integration of spiritual formation, the best of psychology and theology, is I think what we're all really excited about. What we feel, not just because we're curious, although we're all very curious individuals, but like there's a hope that there could be some sort of transformation and integration that the church has been missing or got stuck in this thing called the modern church, where things have disintegrated in unhelpful ways. So what is your what's your curiosity, but then also what's your hope like that you're moving toward?
Yeah, what I want to chase is actually what we were just talking about. I want to create a very simple, it's probably a book for leaders to understand the human's proclivity to go into protection or pretense. Every one of us do it. And there are levels of it that are fine. Like if every staff meeting I'm looking for who's in it and calling them out, that's obnoxious. But so I'm never interested in individual staff meetings. I'm only ever interested in ongoing patterns in any group. And if Sally always walks into the meeting feeling need to protect herself, that's not good. So I want to create a way for leaders to understand this and teach them how to notice it in themselves and their people, so that the leader's posture can create safe space. And safe space, that phrase, I think, can be good and misused. I really mean in the way that the Apostle Paul would use it, like safe space to do difficult work for the Lord, not safe space where I'm fragile and need to get a massage after a difficult meeting. Actually, the opposite. But I don't believe humans grow unless they're human-sized. I think when we go into pretense and protection, our souls are not as open to God because we're busy taking care of ourselves. So that's one whole stream of it. Related to that is a window of repentance. I think when we behave badly, like what often happens, guys, is the people who behave really badly, abuse, and then when they get caught, doubling down on their victims, wielding power. These are some of the worst behaved people in our churches and leadership. I don't defend them at all, but they have become the convenient scapegoat so we can avoid looking at our own complicity in it. And so I'm interested in one of my specialties when people come for our intensives is we sometimes have people who have behaved aggressively, and in their testimony of our work, we're the first group that weren't threatened by it.
Hmm.
So like if you come to our intensive and you have a really tough inner critic and you're down on yourself, to be honest, guys, those are some of the easiest people to care for because you feel sorry for them. But the person that comes bold and arrogant and certain and kicking down a wall, we just want to put them in their place. But in my approach, there's not much difference between the two. They're both just coping mechanisms. And my coaches and I have really field tested a way for even those aggressive bad actors to, for the first time, be able to look at their terrible behavior without shame in front of a peer group and explore what did they do? Why did they do it? What are the consequences? So that's hopefully 50% of my focus or more. And then the other side is I want to end up generating a downloadable organizational anxiety assessment. If you think of your average school teacher, maybe they've got 25 students, maybe that means they've got 40 parents. Your average school teacher is going to fixate on 4 out of those 40 parents, the worst behaved parents. And in my assessment, I'd like them to be able to even get down to the percentage of brain space, like 10% of the parents occupy 60% of my brain, this kind of stuff. So it'll be a hopefully a fairly robust assessment where you can locate the anxiety in the system, locate your attempted solutions, and begin to dissolve the patterns to be well. So it's kind of a audacious goal, but that's what I'm chasing.
It's brilliant. I love that. I mean, I look forward to the day when that all exists.
I just see so many leaders, meaning, I mean, they've not been trained in this. Their very heart is to create safe space and vulnerability, but their actions and words ensure that people won't be vulnerable.
Yeah.
So I really want to equip leaders. I'm not looking at putting people in their place or teaching them, but if I can just help leaders realize there's actually postures and techniques that ensure that people can actually show up as themselves in your presence.
Well, you know what? I'm just going to affirm everything you're saying because I'll just be a little vulnerable here. As a female pastor, I have worked with, people who are just so affirming of women in speech and language, but then it's hard to actually feel that affirmation in the climate and in the culture. And they don't even realize the ways that they're inadvertently making it unsafe for a woman to be there. And, and that's just that. And I know so many women who feel the same way.
That's right.
And that's not the only area where we say things like that, and what I hear you coming with is you have a heart to help people's actions and behavior match the values that they are articulating and really wanting to let hearts line up with behavior.
Well, let's talk about women in the church, and then let's talk about Black women in the church.
Yeah.
Cyd, here would be an example that will end up in my final product. I know that if there is if you sit are in a room of leaders, I know that you are counting the number of women. And if there is less than a third, you are working extra hard at being yourself. So if there's one woman, you'll almost certainly sit right next to her and co-regulate during the meeting. Now, I'm not brilliant. I'm not a woman. I'm just curious, and I'm really good at noticing things. And then what I did in the early days is go over and ask you, like, hey, if we hadn't met, Cyd, I might sit down at a break and say, do you mind if I ask? I'm really curious what your experience is like in this room, and there's no consequence to anything you say. What's it like being only one or two women in it? And I know how to, so I've talked to hundreds of women like this. Sometimes this gets really funny because I'm as white as they come. I am so white. I'm like translucent. Like I'm just a white boy. But sometimes I will be consulting a leadership team where there's one Black woman, and she will say to her boss, how come this guy knows more about me in an hour than you do in 3 years? And I'm not looking to outsmart, but it's just because the minority experience gets overlooked.
Hmm.
in most, if you are majority culture, you are generally blind to the minority experience. And you just don't realize how much hard work minorities take to be human sized. But I can be a white man in power and help minorities increase their chance of being human sized.
Yeah.
It's not difficult. It just takes intentionality. So that would be a quick word on that.
Yeah. Well, I think concrete resources like you're talking about providing are so needed
Yeah.
because there are so many well-intentioned leaders who just don't know how to help their intentions become the reality.
And they don't know, they can't tell the difference between the Holy Spirit and their coping mechanisms. And so
Yes.
then,
Amen to
need
that.
to,
I mean, I can't tell the difference, right? Like I still
yeah,
have the coping mechanisms and I'm like, is this you, God, or is this just me?
that's right. And
Yeah.
it's not easy. I'm still on that journey myself, but at least I ask the question, like my coping mechanism tells me to always make you feel better.
Mm.
It just, my core belief, deeper than my belief in Jesus, is I must help you feel better for me to be okay.
Yeah.
Took me a while to get there. That's pretty crazy. So your average leader has such a low tolerance for tension. They interpret it as threat to their leadership. They already feel like they're inadequate as a leader. And therefore, if a woman or a black person or person of color says, here's my experience, the leader hears it as a threat to their leadership and gets combative, which is the next, for your average lady or person of color, they just file that as that was 1,133rd experience of the same thing.
Yeah.
And so then for your minority culture, it's more of the same. It turns into a high defensiveness in an organization and the whole system perpetuates. I don't want to be too Pollyanna. I'm convinced if leaders want to be well, we can do better in the next 25 years.
Yes. Yes.
Amen.
Let's do it. I believe
Yeah,
in
why
that
not?
with you,
Yeah.
Steve. I
We're
believe in
seeing
that
the
with
other way.
you.
Let's do better.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love for the capable life, what we're doing here in embodied faith, hopefully we can just keep checking in on each other. One of the things that you mentioned was just like if we could just manage our anxiety. What'd you say, 10% more or 15% or something like that?
Yeah.
It reminded me of kind of the stats that people bring up about what makes for a good relationship. And they talk about attuned interactions, and that the research says that you're misattuned or out of tune 70% of the time. And
Yeah.
that you're actually really only just clicking with people that you really care about and really know about 30% of the time. And it's really this is why I'm curious about your windows of repentance, but it's that we talk a lot about the repair process. That's what's key. We often think that a good relationship is one where there's no ruptures, but a good relationship is one where you know the path toward repair, and that
Yes.
you can do it effectively, and that you can do it, without all this shame or anxiety and judgment. You're just like, okay, well, we missed each other, and now we're getting back, and that road back includes repentance, but the repair, and so important.
Exactly right.
Oh man, I just feel like there's so much more we could talk about.
I know.
So much more. Oh, the one
Let's do this
that we
again.
probably do need to get going, but you talked about anxiety as being contagious. Is there, my sense was that there's a reversal to that because you said that's the only thing that's contagious, but I would like to think, maybe Cyd, you could say something, is that actually joy is the opposite
Mm.
contagious. That is
Eh,
when someone walks into a room with a joyful countenance, with a glad to be with you presence on their face and in their persona, that does start, at least maybe I'm just hoping it would, but I feel like that is a contagion also. Do you have any
That's
thoughts
correct.
about that?
Yes. So reactivity is the only type of anxiety that's contagious. That's the big
Okay.
one there. My assumptions about myself are infected by your
Yeah.
expectation about me, kind of thing. But yes, there are many contagions. And that 30% secure attachment, that's very contagious. Like
Mhm.
that feeling of connection. I want more of that. So in systems theory, Jesus of Nazareth, oddly enough, is considered the preeminent example of what they're trying to teach. And he's just this connected if you read Jesus through the lens of attachment or connected presence, it'll like revolutionize your Bible reading when you start to
Yes.
realize James and John are putting their expectation on, hey, we've got a small request. If we
Yeah.
could just be your right and left hand, no big deal, you know. Then the disciples are disgruntled, but Jesus doesn't catch that. The Pharisees are openly accusing him. He acts like he has nothing to prove and nothing to lose, even when he's on trial for his life in front of Pilate. Then he leaves Pilate and he knows that he has to help Peter, who's denied him. Like, it's unbelievable. So yes, Jesus, why do people follow him 2,000 years later? I mean, of course, divinity, but also the magnetism. Who doesn't want to be around that guy?
Yeah.
You know, who wouldn't want to spend more time with that guy? So yeah, I
sure.
totally agree.
Okay, I have two questions. Who in the family systems theory does like zero in on Jesus that way for the people who love researching? Is there like a book or just a couple, or is it just kind of come up?
I still got some work to do on publishing. I want to write a devotional through the scripture through the lens of anxiety. I think that'd be
I
really
love that.
fun.
That'd be
I
great.
can't name someone right now. There are other Christian
Okay,
systems
that's
theorists,
fine.
but no one. Oh, Robert Creech. I would probably Robert Creech. He's retired now. He was a counseling professor at Baylor for years at Truett Seminary, and his system stuff is really good. So he and Jim Harrington and Tricia Taylor wrote The Leader's Journey together. Fantastic book.
Okay.
Jim and Tricia are still actively working. They're amazing at The Leader's Journey. Robert's retired, but then he did a book. I have to pull the name out from the back of my head, but it's something about congregation. I have to Google it.
Oh,
He
yeah.
wrote a book about.
I have that book.
Sid probably has it. Well, I just want to end with that last kind of thought about what you were saying with like reading Jesus's life through like an attachment lens or a managing anxiety lens, especially his interactions with like the disciples, all the bonkers stuff that Peter's is constantly doing, right? If you just kind of read his whole journey as like multiple strategies that Jesus is just peeling one off another, all the way up to his denial and then Peter's restoration, it's such a beautiful, I think, helpful way to kind of think through those things.
Yeah.
Well, Sid, do you have any last comment or thought before we wrap up?
Yeah, my thought is we need to do this again, Steve. That's my
It'd be
last
fun.
thought.
And we
Yeah.
should get your wife on. So maybe next year, I have your prediction of an Oscar Piastri F1 championship. I'm writing that down, and then we could check back in no
Who
more
do you
than a
think,
year
Geoff?
from
Who
now
do
and
you
check
think's
that.
got the championship
I'm-
this year?
I'm probably rooting for Lando, but I think Oster is a pretty good bet. Maybe, George Russell, depending on if their car comes together. So
You know what we
If
could do?
Lan-
It's we could have a conversation about the anxieties that you have observed in the F1 drivers.
Well, these rich kids driving these fast cars. It's F1 is part keeping up with the Kardashians, part engineering, part
Yeah.
sport. If Lando wins, I'll be ecstatic for him. If the young Ferrari guy who looks like a supermodel,
Charles.
Charles Leclerc.
Yeah.
If Lewis wins, I'd probably cry with joy, but I'm rooting for Oscar.
Yeah.
We would love to come back on, and for your audience, you guys will be guests on my podcast, Being Human. I think the episode comes out in April or May. I'm really excited to have you guys on to turn the microphones around, and I love the way you help us process attachment. I heard recently the first criticism I've ever heard about attachment theory, which was somebody saying, once my coping style is diagnosed, I don't know what to do with it. Like, what do I do? And I feel like you guys are really helping us do something with this knowledge. So I love this conversation.
Yeah.
Well, just as a quick answer for those who are wondering, we try to stay out of that like attachment as your personality, but rather it's just a place on your journey, and God's drawing us into secure attachment. And how do we?
And it's
how do we get on
understanding
that
your
journey?
survival
Yep.
strategies so that you can develop new strategies that are more current and updated to today. And I actually found a lot of good news in learning about attachment, because it's like, well, if the reality is I can grow a more secure attachment with God. And that's really good news, because it's not, this
Yes.
is just who you are for the rest of your life. It's
Yes,
now that
that's
you
right.
know where the vulnerabilities and the particular survival strategies are, now you have some ways to move forward. So,
Hmm.
which
Well,
sounds like
thanks for
what you're
being
doing
on.
too,
Oh,
with understanding the false needs.
Hmm.
yeah.
And then being able to understand it's not just my personality, it's the way that I'm driven by these false needs or how these get stirred in me. And then now that I'm aware of them, now I have a different choice.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, where can people find you online, your website, and the different work you do?
Yeah, probably the best thing is just go to my website, stevecusswords.com. And from there, you can get my podcast or Capable Life or books, whatever you want. But that's probably the stevecusswords.com is probably the
The
best place
Steve
to start.
Cuss Words? Did I
Yeah.
hear that right?
Yeah. I mean, with a name
I
like
like
mine,
it.
what are you going to do? Yeah. When my daughter was in second grade, she begged me to marry her off so she could get a new last name.
In second grade.
She was being teased at school. She came home from school. People were making fun of her.
That's right.
Um,
Oh,
yeah, so our name, we're going to have fun with it.
Yeah.
oh man.
That's great.
Yeah, Cyd married into Holsclaw, and for her that was an upgrade. She had a very interesting
Yeah,
Dutch.
my name was
Dutch-
rough.
Dutch
So when I
name,
got,
so-
everybody asked me, are you going to take his name? And I was like, are you kidding? Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
better than what I've got right now.
So good.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We'll talk sometime soon.
My
I hope.
pleasure. Thanks for having me on.